Hello, everyone. I'm excited today to welcome Ms. Yuko Watanabe, who was born and raised in Japan and now lives in the United States. I'm in awe of her initiative in building communities, especially those online, as well as her warmth and her great sense of humor, which I'm sure will come through today's interview, and her ability to tackle anything that comes her way. So, first of all, thank you so much, Yuko, for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, without further ado, I wanted to ask you where you were born and raised.
Okay. Um, I'm born and raised in Otaku in Tokyo. Um, Otaku has like two parts, the nice part and not so nice parts. And I was born in the not so nice part near the Haneda airport. And it's like an industrial area. I was born in mid 80s. So back then it was like little factories, not doing really great. Um, And I remember my summer being like every 3 p.m., the siren would go and say, hey, like the air pollution's so bad, you have to go home. That's my memory of summer. Okay, like we can't stay outside, we can't play outside, we have to go home. It's that sort of industrial area. And that's like a little neighborhood that I grew up. And my parents still live there.
Mhm.
And to paint the picture a little bit more, it's like a massive Danchi style apartment in Tokyo. My dad moved there when he came to Tokyo from the countryside to go to college, and they are still there. And that's where I grew up in this small, small studio apartment. I never had my own room, the tiny,
Oh, wow.
very Danchi style.
Okay, so you lived in an area that it seemed to like you didn't have a lot of daily interaction with people from other countries and such. So how did you end up being interested in living abroad and studying abroad? If you could tell me about your trajectory from then
Yeah.
until, yeah, thank you.
It's like if you can imagine that sort of industrial, not so nice area. I went to a local public elementary school and middle school. And you can kind of imagine like that school was full of kids with lots of trouble. I think their parents are running these factories. They probably had a lot of financial hardship. So my like middle school memory again is like coloring in my science class, like maybe chemistry or something, and maybe biology, whatever that is. I remember coloring for like the entire 60 minutes.
Mhm.
It's H2O, H, let's color it red. And let's color O, blue. Because that was the only way the teacher can engage the kids the whole 60 minutes. And that's what I learned in middle school. Like the last year of middle school, my science education was that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But I luckily had a neighborhood like juku kind of thing, the school that you go after school to actually study. And then I did really well in that juku, and they had fantastic teachers. They've had great classes. I really enjoyed learning math there, and I still in touch with my math teacher. So I studied really hard, and I really enjoyed studying in that juku where I was actually allowed to like study and learn things outside school. So I studied really hard and got into this fancy high school that was like an hour and a half away from my neighborhood in the middle of
Wow.
Tokyo. So that was when I realized when I got to that high school, there were kids who like lived abroad, studied abroad, or parents speak English, or they lived in some other countries. That was the first time in my life that I heard like, oh, there are like people my age who actually like speak this language. Like up until then, I was like, all I knew about English was I have a pen. Like, you know, this is all what I learned in the textbook. I didn't really think that actually people speak, right? Like, I don't think my parents listen to music or watch movies and anything international. So like I didn't really think that was actual living language. So it was really, really shocking when I went to high school and my friends, my classmates actually can speak English. So it's such a shock to me at that moment.
Mhm.
So I wish, okay, like this is it. Like I want to learn this thing that they're speaking. I want to learn to speak English. So I looked into this like summer exchange, study abroad kind of programs. Turns out it's too expensive. I can't afford. So I'm like, okay, I'm giving it up. I can't do this. And this the first summer in my first year in high school. But the very end of that summer, my mom went to this like a local neighborhood shopping mall, and she had a ticket to one like a fukubiki. I don't know how you say that in English, like a raffle, right? It's like a bingo, like big red machine you roll, and the ball comes out. She only had one ticket, so she rolled once, and then there come a golden ball, and everybody went ding 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 ding, first prize, and my mom won a ticket for two to go to Sydney, Australia for a week, and I was like, this is it. This is it. This is free. I can finally go outside Japan. So I was 15, the first year in high school. I went to Sydney for a week with my mom. That was the first time I got on an airplane. First time I got a passport. First time I like packed a suitcase. It was very exciting, and I really loved that week. I still remember things from Australia, and I really loved that experience. I kept doing the same thing, and I couldn't win the prize again. So I applied for like a free study abroad programs that was funded by MOFA. So it was almost free. I guess it wasn't completely free, but it was almost free. And I kept applying for these programs the next summer in the second year in high school. And then also the last year of my high school, I also enrolled in another study abroad program, and I kept going.
Amazing.
That's kind of my introduction to the world outside Japan.
Amazing, amazing. And am I correct that in one of those trips you went to China and the Philippines and you became interested in international development?
Right. I wish to go to a country where people spoke English, because that was my first intention. I wanted to learn English. But then the study abroad programs to English-speaking countries are pretty pricey. So the only free ones that I could find was to go to this small village. Well, at that time it was a small city in very northern China called Mudanjiang. It's very north, like closer to Russia than anything else.
Wow.
It was small back then, but I'm sure it's different now. I loved being in that town. Everybody was so nice. I made so many friends in my class. But yes, no one spoke English, and I learned Chinese instead, which was fabulous. And then a year after, I found the Philippines on the brochure. And like, okay, they must speak English. So I did learn a little bit of English. The people did speak English, but mostly Tagalog. So I learned that too.
Oh, wow.
But little baby steps. But kind of, it wasn't really my intention. But I ended up going to these countries, and then got really interested in seeing, okay, like, there are people, like little children my age, begging on the street. Like, what is going on? Yeah. Or these are, back then in China, or apartments where my host families are living, they had no running hot water or lights in the apartments. Like, what is going on? We are right next to Japan. What is going on with this economy? So that's kind of how I got interested in studying international development, or just economics in general.
Okay, so that's what you went to University of Oregon, was it, to study? And
again, yeah, that wasn't really my choice, University of Oregon.
Okay.
Now that I think back, Oregon's fantastic. I'm not saying anything bad about Oregon here, but I decided I want to study international development economics. But I've never been to the U.S., but I was determined I'll study that and get a master's degree in the U.S. And I figured it's easier to do the undergrad in the U.S. as well than doing it in Japan and going over. And I figured that would be tricky, so I figured I might as well just go straight to college in the U.S. But then at that point, I had zero. I didn't know anyone in the U.S. Never been. The closest, remember the closest place to speak English-speaking country was Manila. And I had no connection. I had no one to ask any questions. I had no idea. So I saw this flyer in my high school. There was an agency that can help students go land in colleges in the U.S. So okay, I'm going to apply for this one. I pay a little bit of money to this agency and see where I end up. And that agency had all the colleges in the U.S., but I thought, well, my parents are in Japan, so let's go to the West Coast because it's closer to Japan. And let's not go to California because that California, I heard, has lots of Japanese speaking people, so I might not learn English. Let's not go to California. And then I looked at the map and saw, well, Washington seems really north. It must be really cold. Let's go to Oregon. So I went to the biggest college in the state of Oregon, which is University of Oregon. And I love Eugene, Oregon. It's cute. Now I really love it. But back then, gosh, it was so very shocking. It's like, all I can see is beautiful mountains. And this person who's like born and raised in Tokyo, it's like, oh my gosh, I was like, oh, I can see his mountains. What did I do? So that's how I ended up in Oregon. I didn't love it then. I really absolutely hated it and thought it was the most sleepy town ever. Nothing was open except for library and Starbucks. Nothing was open after 10 p.m. is my memory. Because I probably didn't know all the fun places. So I studied really hard, way too much. And I graduated little shorter than 3 years.
Amazing. Wow.
Just because I wanted to get out.
No. You're too humble. You're just, well, that's a lot of hard work. That's really amazing. Wow. Okay. And I understand you worked at some organizations after that to work in development. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I studied really hard in Oregon, made sure that I got really good grades so I can go to a good grad school. And I did that. And when I got to my grad school, I did a couple of internships to see, okay, do I really like this career? Do I really like this field in international development? So I got an internship in Bangladesh working with the United Nations. That was like my dream come true. Like that is exactly what I wanted to do ever since I've been to that, the China and the Manila. And I absolutely didn't like that experience at all.
Oh, okay.
It was really hard for me. And I realized, okay, this might not be the kind of thing that I want to do. There's a lot of politics. I mean, Bangladesh had a really difficult time then. A lot of things and changes were happening within the United Nations and the agency I was in. And that was a little too much. So I said, okay, maybe I should go back home and then work in the Japanese agency that works in international development. So that's exactly what I did. After finishing my grad school in the US, I went back home and then worked for the Japanese government agency that did international development. I did work for a couple of them. And it was also a very interesting experience that after spending several years in the US, now I've become somebody slightly not 100% Japanese. I found it really hard to fit in the way of doing things in the Japanese government. I can't generalize it. It's really different team to team, I'm sure. But I had a really hard time fitting in.
Okay.
And that's how I came back to the US.
And so, what do you enjoy most about American culture? You said that you've always wanted to study English, but it seems like you've always been drawn most to the US and not, for example, you went to Sydney first, but you didn't necessarily go to Australia after that to study abroad. So I was wondering about that.
That's true. I think I chose the US mostly because to have a career in international development, I knew I had to get a master's from well-known colleges, and that's mostly in the US. So that was my first choice. But, that was the first, my first thought. But then after, living here for a while, especially like in the West Coast, like Oregon, people are just so nice. Very, very chatty. I don't know if you've been to like supermarket in Oregon. People would just chat and chat. And like in a similar way, you go to Trader Joe's and people started talking about like, oh, how do you cook this? And that happens like everywhere. And it's just so casual and nice and friendly. And I think that's how it was something I really enjoyed. And like closer to like how I grew up. And what I'm used to. And like,
Mm.
again, I didn't come from like a fancy, well-established family in Japan. We're
Mhm.
more broken style, casual, and everybody's friendly. So I found this sort of, I don't know if I call it West Coast culture or this sort of casual frankness of the US. Everybody is equal, everybody's friendly, despite the fact
Okay.
that I really didn't enjoy Oregon the first time I was there. But I think that really changed who I am, like very early on in my life. Like,
Mhm.
okay, this is like nice.
Mhm. Mhm. Oh, that's really great. And I wanted to ask about your current work. So I understand that you went freelance a few years ago. Would you mind talking about that decision? Because I know it must be really hard to let go of all these prestigious organizations that you worked at because of, you said that it's been a dream for such a long time and you went to grad school for it, etc. So it must have taken some courage to go alone. So would you mind explaining that decision?
Oh, for sure. I wish I could glorify that fact and say that was my choice, but it wasn't. I was laid off, and
Okay.
freelance was pretty much the only choice only way I could go. I had a newborn then, and it was maybe a third year living and working in the US where, I didn't have that many friends, I didn't have family. I had no, like, pretty much no support, and I had to find a job. And up until then, most of my experience has been something to do with US Japan relations. And me based in Seattle, no, there's not that much work on US Japan relations. There might be
Mm.
some, but I found it really difficult. So, really, the only choice I could continue having a career was going freelance and take up on small projects so that I can make it a full time. So it wasn't really my choice, but that was my way of, okay, trying to figure out my career. What do I want to do? What can I do? Or what do I want to do when I grow up? I was still trying to figure it out. I still don't know if I figured that out now, but
Mhm.
that was an interesting period of my life, going freelance and figuring out, okay, what do people think of me? What do people like think I'm really good at? Whereas like, what do I want to do? Like, where does that overlap? So that was an
Mhm.
interesting period of my life. Yeah,
Mhm. Mhm. And what kind of work do you do? Is it mostly consulting or?
mostly consulting and
Okay.
in a variety of things. I did everything. I did things like translating documents or reports, English and Japanese, to translating like marketing websites that some small startup ran. It's sometimes US based, sometimes Japanese based. And then everything in between. I also did something related to international development. I also did something that is nothing to do with international development, but more to do with like a local startup scene in Seattle, something, some product that they wanted to sell towards the audience in Japan. So like all sorts of spectrum, all sort of work. I tried everything. That was, at the time that, okay, I'm going to do everything I can do and see what sticks.
Mhm. Mhm. And I love that initiative you have. And you mentioned that one of the factors you had was you had a newborn that you had to take care of. And just to backtrack a little bit, would you mind explaining about your family, how you met your husband, and yeah, where you are now with them, etc.?
Yeah, I met my husband in my grad school program. So he also worked in international development. And then my parents are still in Tokyo, but his parents in the East Coast to US. So when I realized I'm expecting, we were in Japan. We were living in Japan at that point. But then we said, okay, to start a family, do you want to continue to be in Tokyo, both working in international development? That meant
Mm.
me taking international flights, mostly over 24 hours. I was flying to Ethiopia quite often then. He also had a project
Oh,
in
wow.
Rwanda and Kenya, so he also had a lot of flights going out of Tokyo. So we hardly met in Tokyo. And going forward with a baby coming, we said, okay, maybe this isn't sustainable. So we looked at the world map and say, hey, where do we want to start a family all together? And we said, maybe Seattle. Despite the fact we've never been there, we had no friends, we had no family, no one, we didn't know anyone. But my husband Nick, he flew here first and then looked for a job, and luckily he ended up in one. So okay, he has a job, he's got health insurance. Let's have a baby in Japan and then fly over. So I came to Seattle about almost 11 years ago with a 6-week-old baby in my arm. And that was my first day in Seattle. And then since then I got a job locally here. And it was when I had the second born that I was laid off. So at that point, when I went freelancing, I had one kid in daycare, and another kid, just an infant.
Amazing. Wow. And I had no idea you hadn't even been to Seattle. Do you think you'll stay there going forward, or do you
Well,
have any future plans?
we've been here for 11 years,
Hmm.
and the biggest reason we really like here is the schools. We have two, in my neighborhood that I'm here, we have two public elementary schools that does immersion Japanese education. So two of my kids, they go to this local school. Half of the day, they speak in Japanese, their teacher's Japanese, they learn science, math, and language from this Japanese teacher, and do all these cultural celebrations, and Hina Matsuri, and Obon, and all that stuff, which I really appreciate. It's a wonderful school, and the kids love it too.
Hmm.
So I think we're gonna stay here. But my years in Japan and US is coming kind of equal.
Mm.
And, we're started to think, okay, do we want to stay here? Or do we want to go back to Japan? Or do we want to go somewhere else? So we're kind of actively thinking about maybe in the future, might go to Japan again or somewhere else in the US.
Thank you so much. And earlier, what you mentioned really struck me when you said that after studying abroad in the US and working here as well, you decided to move to Japan and work there, and you realized that you felt like you weren't 100% Japanese anymore. So I assume that's, you have a sense of identity that's constantly changing. And I was wondering if you ever feel a sense of loneliness sometimes because here
Mm.
in the United States, maybe you feel like your Japanese identity is strong, but when you're in Japan, maybe not so much. And so, how do you grapple with that loneliness?
It's interesting that you ask. I don't think I've felt that lonely in Japan or in the US
Okay.
in a bigger sense, mostly because I've spent so much time outside of these two countries and realized, okay, what really is the loneliness? And like remote village in India that I spent almost a year. Really, there's no one that is not from that town. I was the only one. It's really tough to find friends, to find like no friends, no family. You might have colleagues, but those are really, really tough. So in relative sense, I'm happier and having easier time finding friends and people to connect with in the US or in Japan. And for example, in Seattle, there's a lot of Japanese American people and big community here. So I never feel like I need to actively seek friends. There's a lot of people to connect with, and it's relatively easy. People appreciate Japanese heritage. And I also, in Japan, depends on which sector you are, what kind of work you do, but I think it's also, easier to find these people. I think it's harder when you're outside of these two countries.
That makes sense. Well, actually, speaking of, how did you live your daily life in a remote village when sometimes you don't speak the native language and there weren't many others who looked like you or were like you?
That's I think if I did that today, it would look very different. You have access to internet, you have
Mm.
phones. Back then, I wrote letters. I was reading books, and maybe I had a phone card, international phone card, and calling people. But back then,
Mm.
there's nothing that I could immediately connect with people. So it was
Mm.
very, very difficult. It was very, very lonely. So I think I read a lot of books. I wrote a
Mm.
lot, letters to friends,
Mm. Mm.
journals to myself. And that's
Mm.
maybe because that's one of the reasons why I still like reading and writing and that sort of things.
Mm. Thank you so much. I think that's a great segue into the next questions that I wanted to ask. And I really, really love the online communities you've been making based on writing too. First with All Your Tomorrows and then Tape Story. So if you could explain a little bit about what you ask people to do and why you created that community, I would love to hear that.
Yeah, All Our Tomorrow is a blog site that I've been running for more than, I can't tell, maybe 15 years now, with lots of self written essays about what they're struggling at, whatever they want to write about. I basically wrote a first piece. All we say is just age, whatever title you want to give, mostly like a profession. And then I give them no themes or no instructions, no deadlines of any sort, no structural instructions, and very, very free form. I wrote one piece first and I asked my friend to write another one. It kind of went on. So I have almost like 100 essays written by all women around the world, but mostly of Japanese heritage, on that website. And that kind of transformed into this thing called Tapestry, where during the pandemic, I paired with my partner, Kei-san. She is a coach, so she can coach people and then, think about the struggles and challenges or the things that you want to talk about, write about. So it's a little easier for people to write. And so far, until then, I was just asking people to write. But it was, as you get a little older, there's a lot of things to unravel. And she was very helpful unraveling those things internally so that people feel more ready to write. And Tapestry, I think we have several essays there too, but all similar style about, what they're thinking about, their career, their life, all sort of things.
Hmm. And I wanted to ask, so I think it's so interesting how you ask them to have their age and then, as you said, profession or however they call themselves. So first of all, why do you make it anonymous? And second of all, why is age important in this case?
That's a good question. I started it when I was in Tokyo, but commuting to Ethiopia, and I had a friend who worked in Ethiopia, and I could tell she was feeling very lonely. She was working there. Her friends were far away. Her family's far away, and I could totally understand how she felt based on what I went through in India. So I said, well, you can't have these one-on-one conversations with people. There was no Zoom back then, right? So
Right.
all you can do is letters. So,
Mm.
okay, I will have these one-on-one be on behalf of her in Tokyo, and I'll write up these pieces and then post it so that she can read, so she feels like she did one-on-one with these people. Now, I didn't do my work. I just let other people write those things for me. But essentially, that's how it started. And at that point, the age felt very important because we were often
Mm.
writing about, okay, like this boyfriend, or we're getting married, or we're expecting a
Mm.
baby, or a lot of things about sort of age sensitive life career choices. So it was important back then. Now I think also is a very interesting thing to have too, just to imagine who is writing this piece at age and what they do, and that's
Mhm.
really pretty much the only clue you have to who the author is.
Right, right. That's fascinating. And actually, it connects to another amazing online community you have because in that case, everyone does have a name, but actually it's more difficult because everyone has the same name. And I wanted to ask you about the Yuko Watanabe Club. Like, are you one of the founders and what do you do, etc.?
I'm one of the early members. I'm the number 3, I think.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
and I think we have maybe like 55 or closer to 60 Yuko Watanabes in the club right
What?
now. But no, but we're nothing compared to Tanaka Hirokazu, because they found like over 200 Tanaka Hirokazu, and they like a couple years ago they got together in Shibuya, like all
What?
160 of them, and they
What?
applied for the World Guinness record, and they were awarded one,
Oh
only
my
to be
God.
beaten by someone else in some other parts of the country. So you
Wow.
should read about it. It's fantastic. They've started a company and they have all this
Oh,
gifts and products and T-shirts you can purchase.
that's so
Um,
cool.
it is very very cool, and it's if you're in this,
Mhm.
like you feel this instant connection with these other Yuko Watanabes because they
Right.
feel like you're friends with them. And I'm also one of the biggest victims of this because I have a very standard email address. So all
Mhm.
the emails come to me. So I have a glimpse into these lives of you. She went to dentist. She had this order this water thing or this cosmetic. She didn't go to that dentist again. Um, so I,
That's so funny.
I often just text all this Yuko Watanabe Club thread and say, hey, who was it that was invited to this fancy party in Shinjuku?
That's hilarious. Oh my God. So
It
how do you
is
address
fun,
each
but it's
other?
not always. We have this, so we follow the same norm that the Tanaka Hirokazu do.
Mhm.
They add like Shibuya no Tanaka Hirokazu or Seattle
Okay.
no Tanaka Hirokazu. So I'm the Yuko Watanabe in Seattle, and there's
Okay.
another Yuko Watanabe in Shibuya, or maybe there's the writer Yuko Watanabe, or
Mhm.
here's a yeah, like there are different ways of you kind of choose whatever you want to be called, but
Mhm.
and then we
Mhm.
also have numbers. I'm number 3. Everybody has numbers. There's a big spreadsheet that we can look
Okay.
up. Um, it's very hilarious, but then again, it's not all fun. We're trying to make this like a fun thing because most of the times it's not fun. 'Cause
Mhm.
I work as a consultant. I go to all the other companies. There's almost always another Yuko Watanabe in the client
Mhm.
company. Then I get in trouble. A lot of emails don't come to me. A lot of emails are sent to
Mhm.
the wrong person. For example, when I got admitted to my grad school, I got the letter, but I didn't get the emails afterwards because it was going to the other Yuko Watanabe who was in the program 2 years ahead of me. So
Oh
I thought
wow.
maybe it was a joke. I was admitted.
Oh no.
Maybe that was just somebody pulling a prank on me, and I didn't really actually got admitted. But apparently I was. I'm glad, but like that. There's so many things like that. So we're trying to
Mhm.
make it more fun so that it's good to be this in the big group of Yuko Watanabes. Eventually, this becomes like a benefit thing. You
Mhm.
get 20% off if you go to this Yuko Watanabe store. You get this membership if you go to this store or something like that. That's our goal.
I'm sure that so many of you have struggled with this in your entire life, but then you have this really fun way to turn this on its head and have so much interesting perspectives. And I think that's a really wonderful way to connect with each other as well.
Yeah, well, when the tapestry and all our tomorrows as well. But as you get older, it becomes harder to make friends with random people. We don't go to next school. There's no next school that you can go to. You don't
Hmm.
switch your jobs that often. So
Hmm.
it's kind of a fun way to meet a complete strangers and like become instant friends.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much. And what are your future plans? It could be for these projects that you're working on, or it could be for work. Like, do you have any dreams and goals that you want to share?
Nope, nope.
Oh,
I
okay.
have no idea. And
I
please
love it.
tell me. I used to think there's like the goals and resolutions and there's the path and the career. Nah, no, none. I've given up. There's so many things at this point of my life, the kids, my husband, my job, my kids' education, my kids' sports, my parents' health, all sort of thing. It's kind of out of my hand. So the best I can do is to stay well and like be ready to move whatever direction I need to move tomorrow. That's the best I can do. I stopped making long-term plans.
Okay. Okay. And is that true also for, you mentioned that there's a possibility that you might be closer to your parents in Japan at some point. That's also something that you'll continue considering as well.
Yeah, I'm the only child, and my parents are over 80 years old. So I'm thinking at some point in my life I will have to either commute to Tokyo to take care of them pretty often or move closer to them. We'll see what happens, but that's part of that's one of the big reasons why, I need to be kind of nimble and I need to remain nimble and be ready for anything that comes up in my life. And I'm okay with that. It's not like, you get a job at this fancy company and your life is done. No, you get laid off. You don't know what's going to happen. So, might as well be ready for anything.
That is an amazing and wonderful perspective. And that's something that I needed to hear as well because I tend to really wonder about my future and I tend to worry. And I'm also an only child as well. I need to think about that a lot. So it's really nice to have someone who's on the same boat.
Yes.
So many of us. And I also wanted to ask, this is probably going to be one of the last questions, but if you have any advice for anyone else who's also struggling with difficult life choices because they might be living or working in multiple countries.
It's a really hard question.
Okay.
But I think I'll say, get used to that difficulty because it's always going to be a struggle. Find a joy in that struggle because, like I said, it's gonna go on. And I'm going to talk about yoga again because this is how my brain works. But I do yoga every morning. In the style of yoga that I do, there's early on in the series, there's a one pose. You stand on one foot, take one foot, the other foot, and then you move around and then like bend forward and then balance. It's a really difficult pose because you're standing on one foot and balancing. But that sort of, I always thought, well, if I do practice this pose every day for many years, you eventually get to this perfect balance. And like you don't fall, you look amazing, and you feel amazing, and you're amazing. The rest of the day will be amazing. And I started to realize, no, there's no such thing. Like we're not a robot. Like how many days, how matter like how long you've practiced this pose, you always fall out of this balance. The best thing you can do is stay well so that you find ease in that really difficult pose. And that's the best we can hope for. And I feel like the life is kind of similar. A balance is not something, you reach, but you're always working for it every single day. And that perfect balance point is different every day. So you kind of have to work hard every day to find that balance. And that's every day. And that's the life. And you have to kind of find joy and ease while struggling. And I feel like that's my life as well. There's no perfect like combination of identity or like language mix to speak or cultural affiliations or a job or whatever. There's no such thing. And what I feel comfortable today might be very different from what I feel comfortable next year. Like I remember at the beginning of pandemic, I was totally freaking out that my children were speaking more English and less Japanese. Now I'm completely comfortable. They're totally speaking in English. It's all different. Things change, and it might change as well. Maybe in 5 years they'll be speaking in Japanese. Who knows? But I'm okay. I hope that made sense.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you brought in yoga as well. I was meaning to ask about it. And yeah, I think it's so incredible how everything you put your mind to, you go all the way to the top and you work so hard at it. Because I was really surprised to learn that you only started yoga just a few years ago and now you're a yoga instructor. That is incredible.
So wild.
No, really. I think that really covered everything I wanted to ask, but is there anything you'd like to add?
No, but I really wanted to thank you for doing this. I
Thank you.
think your intention here is very similar to how I started the OR Tomorrows,
Mhm.
except that it's really hard to take these conversations public. Like that's why I started asking people to write their own pieces, and I don't have to do very much. Now here you have to edit and write and take it into the sites, and then like it's so much work. But I think I've had these one-on-one conversations with friends and mentors, oh, the neighbors, anyone, a lot of people at like all points of transitions and all over the place. And those conversations really shape me today. So I really think what you're doing here is really important, and I think you're giving hope to a lot of people around you too. So thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you. Well, like you said for your essays too, like none of this would be possible without everybody contributing their stories and everybody really opening up. Thank you so much. And as I said in the beginning, your sense of humor is amazing. I laughed so much. And I already feel better because of that too. Just having a sense of humor about everything and being flexible and taking things as is something that I'm really learning a lot from you. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you so much for having me here.